Greetings to all our viewers tuning into our channel. There are moments in war that strike like a bolt of lightning across the sky, brief flashes that last only seconds, yet reveal deep fractures running beneath the surface. Ukraine's shootdown of a Russian Su-35 fighter jet was one such moment, fleeting, yet a vivid reflection of the internal tensions fueling this war. This wasn't just the fall of a fighter jet, it was a sign of a system in turmoil. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been following the Russia-Ukraine war for over 3 years now, witnessing thousands of battles and dozens of weapons deployed. But sometimes it's the smaller events that make us pause and ask, what's really going on behind the front lines? When an Su-35, the pride of the Russian Air Force, is taken down by Ukraine's asymmetric tactics, it's not just a technical failure. It's a warning sign of coming tremors, shaking budgets, disrupted military supply chains, and the political image that Moscow has painstakingly built. The Su-35 has been touted by Russia as a symbol of technological superiority, a master of the skies. But on the Ukrainian battlefield, where every move is tracked by NATO satellites, every frequency jammed, and every flight path potentially targeted by mobile air defense systems, that aircraft suddenly becomes alarmingly vulnerable. When it exploded into a fireball in the sky, the message wasn't just for the Russian military. It echoed into political meeting rooms from Moscow to Brussels. Behind that explosion, we hear 3 reverberations: the echo of Russia's economy straining to replace costly military assets, the echo of Kremlin propaganda scrambling to patch up holes in its narrative, and the echo of Western defense contractors quietly smiling as their aid proves effective. Modern warfare is no longer just about bullets, it's about balance sheets, semiconductor supply chains, and lobbying in Washington. The downing of a single Su-35 lays bare a harsh truth. Sometimes, the death of an expensive piece of military hardware is the starting point of a chain of interests that neither side can or wants to stop. And when we take a closer look at that moment, the fireball fading, the wreckage falling, the news spreading across the world, we begin to understand that the war in Ukraine is entering a new phase, one where every small victory carries heavy consequences, and every loss, even of a single aircraft, can shift strategic calculations at the national level. To truly understand what's happening, we must return to the battlefield, back to where the Su-35 fell. When the dust settles on the battlefield, we begin to see more clearly the true meaning behind the downing of a Su-35. On paper, the Su-35 is the pride of the Russian Air Force, capable of speeds over Mach 2, equipped with thrust vectoring engines for superior maneuverability, a powerful electronically scanned phased array radar, and the ability to carry an arsenal of long-range air-to-air missiles. It has been exported, advertised, and showcased at defense exhibitions as a strategic treasure. But the battlefield in Ukraine is where theory meets harsh reality. There, the Su-35 isn't a superjet flying in ideal conditions. It's a target being hunted. Ukraine doesn't possess an air force of equal strength, nor does it have advanced AESA radars on its fighters like the US or Europe. What it does have is adaptability, real-time tactical intelligence from NATO, and a cheap yet ever-shifting air defense network. The shootdown of the Su-35 highlights a military truth experts have warned about for years. Technological superiority does not guarantee survivability. Russia believed that agility and long-range strike capabilities would allow the Su-35 to dominate Ukrainian skies. But in reality, every flight path can turn into an invisible trap. Ukraine has learned how to hide in the radar, constantly change deployment positions, and blend Soviet-era systems with Western technology to create a layered and unpredictable air defense web. More importantly, they've learned to strike at the right moment. To take down a jet like the Su-35, you don't need the most expensive gear. You need to hit it when it's vulnerable. The moment it activates its radar, the moment it changes direction, the moment its electronic jamming hasn't kicked in. Ukraine is able to pinpoint those moments thanks to NATO satellite data, AWACS reconnaissance planes, and modern target sharing systems. In modern warfare, information moves faster than maneuverability. Every time a Su-35 is shot down, it's a reminder that Russia cannot claim total air superiority, despite deploying its best fighter jets. Ukrainian air defenses are no longer just defensive, they are a hidden blade beneath the battlefield dust. Russia knows this all too well, which is why Su-35 pilots now fly lower, more cautiously, avoiding high-risk zones. This dramatically reduces the effectiveness of their airstrikes. A pilot constantly fearing a missile from the ground can't focus on supporting the front lines. And while many people see only a burning aircraft, military analysts see a chain reaction. Lowered pilot morale, shrinking operational range, increased pressure on ground radar systems, forcing Russia to revise tactics and spread its forces thinner to protect previously secure areas. One Su-35 goes down, and Moscow's entire air strategy has to adapt. The irony is, despite how severe the damage is, the cost for Ukraine to land that blow was just a fraction. A single surface-to-air missile, a mobile air defense unit, a stream of shared data, all of it together costs less than 1/20th the price of the Su-35. This cost asymmetry turns the incident into a blow not just to Russia's military, but to its wallet. And as we stare at the wreckage lying in the frozen fields, we can't help but ask, who will pay the price for the next Su-35? Russia clearly can't pull back. Every lost asset is a tacit admission of failure. The more Ukraine hits, the more the West can prove its aid is working. And in that deadlock, both sides are forced to keep pushing forward. But striking is one thing. Replacing, replenishing, and sustaining, that's the true pressure that drags the war on. The fall of one Su-35 doesn't just leave a hole in the sky. It opens holes in the factories, the supply chains, and the budget sheets. To understand how deep this strike cuts, we have to leave the battlefield and step into the place few ever see, the Russian defense plants now running 24/7. In modern warfare, the destruction of a piece of military hardware doesn't simply mean it disappears from the battlefield. It leaves behind a deep void that stretches all the way into laboratories, factories, production lines, and even behind closed doors in defense budget meetings. When the Su-35 crashed into a Ukrainian field, its flames died out within minutes, but the fires inside Russia's defense industrial complex flared up stronger than ever. Because replacing a Su-35 isn't as simple as pulling spare parts from a warehouse to assemble a new jet. It's an entire grueling cycle of a war economy, a system Russia is now forced to run at maximum capacity under sweeping sanctions. Russia can build aircraft, but it cannot manufacture advanced semiconductors. It can assemble engines, but it lacks Western-grade infrared sensors. It can fabricate airframes, but it's short on microcontrollers, signal decoders, and FPGAs, which must be smuggled from China or routed through intermediaries in Central Asia. That means every Su-35 built in 2024 to 2025 is a patchwork of improvisation, replacing what's missing, using what's available, not necessarily what's best. A strong defense industry requires a stable supply chain, but Russia is surviving on trickles, fragmented, expensive, and fraught with risk. A single sanctioned thermal sensor can halt an entire assembly line. A shipment of components held up in Kazakhstan can leave 40 factory workers idle for weeks. One new US sanction can triple the price of black market chips overnight. Against this backdrop, every downed Su-35 becomes a serious logistical dilemma. Russia no longer has the aircraft reserves it once did in the early phase of the war. Production lines are stretched to the brink. Most young engineers have left the factories to avoid being drafted. Those who remain work 12 to 14 hours a day, all while the quality of available components keeps declining. Russia's major defense plants, from Komsomolsk-on-Amur to Nizhny Novgorod, are no longer centers of innovation for next-gen fighters. They've become technical emergency rooms, scrambling to keep aging aircraft from falling into part shortages. When a jet goes down, Russia doesn't just lose metal, engines, and weapons. It loses time, capacity, and technical credibility. In this war, time itself is a weapon. Ukraine only needs a few minutes to launch a surface-to-air missile. Russia needs months, or even years, to recover from the loss. That is the most dangerous asymmetry of all. Beyond the cost of production, there's something even more critical: political cost. A Su-35 shot down in the third year of the war carries far more weight than in the first. It signals attrition, fatigue, and exposed weaknesses across Russia's air defense, combat, and manufacturing systems. It forces the political elite to ask, is this war still worth the price? But instead of slowing down, Russia is being forced to accelerate. Every time an expensive jet is lost, the only response is to make up for it, with budget increases, factory overdrive, and belt-tightening across the civilian economy. The defense budget has soared to record highs, exceeding 6% of GDP, a level unseen since the Cold War. Inflation is surging, the cost of smuggled parts is skyrocketing. Civilian sectors are bleeding labor into defense plants. That's why researchers call this phase the war economy trap. Once a country steps into it, it becomes almost impossible to step out. Russia must keep producing to replenish, and that very act of replenishment pushes it further into the need to prolong the war, just to justify the spending. But the exhaustion in the factories is only part of a much more complex picture. Because modern warfare doesn't just play out in labs and on production lines, it also takes place on the battlefield of perception, where every defeat can become a psychological weapon. A downed Su-35 puts pressure on the budget, but it places even greater pressure on the Kremlin's communication strategy, which is desperately trying to maintain the image of invincibility before the Russian public. And from the shortages of chips, we enter the realm of controlled narratives. In every war, there are things whose loss inflicts more damage than military hardware: image, credibility, and the story a government tries to tell its people. And for the Kremlin, that image is just as important as weapons, perhaps even more so. That's why when a Su-35 is shot down, Russia's first response doesn't happen on the battlefield, but in press rooms, in directives sent to state media, and in public opinion guidance, bulletins. The issue is that modern war isn't just fought with tanks and missiles. It's fought with information. Moscow knows this well and has spent years crafting the image of the Russian military as an elite, disciplined force equipped with some of the world's most advanced weapons. The Su-35 is a symbol of that narrative, an ace fighter jet meant to showcase parity with the West, a trump card of air superiority. But when a symbol falls, the story collapses with it, and that's what the Kremlin fears most. In the hours following the incident, Russian state media either remained silent or issued vague, formulaic reports. The aircraft experienced technical difficulties, the pilot ejected safely, or the cause is under investigation. These phrases have become so familiar that hearing them signals exactly what's being avoided. Every time the Kremlin leans on such language, the Russian public understands. Another serious loss is being swept under the rug. Not necessarily because they want to deceive, but because acknowledging failure means acknowledging a more unsettling truth. The war isn't going as smoothly as the propaganda suggests. If even the Su-35, Russia's national pride, can be shot down, what else is at risk? Those questions are more dangerous than any missile. In Russian society, the propaganda machine is a kind of psychological shield designed to sustain public support for the military campaign. If that shield cracks, doubt spreads quickly. So controlling information isn't just about hiding losses, it's about protecting a mental framework. That Russia is strong, that victory is only a matter of time, that current sacrifices are justified. But here's the problem. Social media, commercial satellites, and international press outlets all operate outside the Kremlin's control. Within minutes of the Su-35's crash, images of wreckage, GPS coordinates, and Western expert analysis flooded the internet. In an era where everyone carries a camera and every battle has a dozen angles, hiding the truth has become nearly impossible. This turns the information war into an uneven fight. Russia tries to construct a narrative. The outside world immediately refutes it. The international public logs Russia's defeat, while inside Russia, citizens are left navigating two contradictory streams of information. That gap alone creates immense pressure on the Kremlin. A downed Su-35 isn't just a blow to Russia's military. It's a stress test for a propaganda system that's been stretched to its limits after 3 years of war. Russia may be able to replace aircraft, but it's far harder to restore credibility once it's been eroded, bit by bit. And the irony is this: while the Kremlin scrambles to conceal and downplay the loss, the West doesn't need to hide anything at all. In fact, they capitalize on every Russian failure as evidence, used to rally public support, justify defense spending, and prove that aid to Ukraine is working. If the information battlefield is where Russia finds itself on the defensive, The arena of strategic interest is where the West takes the offensive. And from the pressure inside Moscow's press rooms, the story leads us to parliamentary halls in Washington, Berlin, and Paris, where the fall of a single jet becomes the perfect pretext to expand defense budgets. What many people don't realize is that every time Russia loses a major piece of equipment like the Su-35, it's not just Ukraine that gains a psychological or tactical advantage. The ones who benefit the most and the fastest are often far from the battlefield, in the halls of Western parliaments, in the offices of defense contractors, and in the closed-door meetings where military budgets are decided. In Washington, Berlin, Paris, or London, every image of a downed Su-35 is instantly turned into strategic evidence. Lawmakers, ministers, generals, and national security advisors only need to project that fireball on a screen, and they immediately have a persuasive argument. Ukraine is performing well, the aid is effective, and we must continue and even increase our support. And so, tens of billions of dollars are added to defense budgets. Missile, artillery, and air defense production lines are expanded, doubled, tripled. Defense giants like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Rheinmetall, Saab, and MBDA watch their stock prices soar. A Su-35 falls in Ukraine, but its value is calculated in rising profits on Western stock exchanges. The longer the war drags on, the richer the defense industry becomes. And every analyst understands one hard truth about modern warfare. When the defense sector turns into a money-printing machine, ending the war is no longer the top priority for those behind the curtain. The West didn't start this conflict, but they know how to leverage it. Ukraine has become a live-fire testing ground, proving the effectiveness of Western arms. Patriot missiles taking down Russian jets, HIMARS striking ammo depots, Storm Shadows piercing strategic targets, NASAMS shielding cities. Each success sends a report back to Parliament. Our systems are performing beyond expectations. These reports matter just as much as victories on the battlefield. They are tickets to new contracts, to production expansion, to lobbying for larger defense budgets. With every Ukrainian success, weapons manufacturers gain one more reason to request government orders, and governments in turn gain one more reason to justify military spending to their citizens. It's a perfectly closed loop of interest. Ukraine fights, Western countries supply weapons, the weapons prove effective, defense budgets grow, the defense industry profits, and more weapons are sent back to Ukraine. But behind that loop lies a cold truth. In war, emotion and ethics often take a backseat to economic interest. The West wants to help Ukraine, but it can't ignore the reality that the war is generating hundreds of billions of dollars in business opportunities, and that very interest helps lock in a hardline stance. Ukraine must not lose, Russia must not win, and the war must not end too soon. Within this picture, Ukraine isn't just a nation under attack. It's a key link in the vast machinery of Western power, economics, technology, and industry. Every time Ukraine shoots down another high-value Russian asset, the West gains more justification to invest further, push harder, and sink deeper into the conflict. But that also places Ukraine in a difficult position. Because once the West sees Kyiv as part of its interest chain, Ukraine cannot easily negotiate peace, cannot halt the war, cannot stop, even when exhausted. Every battlefield victory deepens its reliance on foreign aid, on foreign defense industries, on the political will of capitals thousands of kilometers away. And from there, a new spiral begins, one neither Russia nor Ukraine can easily escape. Russia must ramp up production to replace losses. Ukraine must keep fighting to secure continued aid, and the West must keep supplying arms to sustain its broader security strategy. A single Su-35 crashing into a Ukrainian field doesn't just leave a crater in the ground. It carves a deep hole into a strategic structure where all sides are now trapped, unable to win quickly, unable to afford defeat, and unable to stop. And from that landscape of interests, we arrive at the center of the vicious cycle, a war that is now feeding itself. From a distance, the Russia-Ukraine war can look like an endless news cycle. Clashes, airstrikes, counteroffensives, and aid packages. But up close, it resembles a massive machine, a self-perpetuating vortex in which every side, Russia, Ukraine, and the West, is locked in motion, unable to stop even if they wanted to. Every loss, every success, every destroyed piece of hardware becomes fuel that keeps the vortex spinning faster and faster. Russia entered this war believing it could win quickly, impose a new order, and force Ukraine into submission. But as the conflict dragged on, it became clear that victory wouldn't just depend on military might, but on the ability to sustain an economy, keep production lines running, and maintain public support. Every time a Su-35 is shot down, the Russian government is forced to justify the sacrifice, insisting it is necessary, that it is worth it for a greater goal. And to make that justification stick, they must keep fighting, harder, deeper, broader. But that in turn traps Russia in a state of no return. If they stop now, all the losses of the past 3 years will have been in vain. If they de-escalate, their rivals will see it as a sign of weakness, and Russia's standing on the world stage will collapse. If they negotiate, hardliners within their own system will see it as betrayal. Russia is locked in a cycle. The more it loses, the more it must press forward. The more it sacrifices, the more it must deepen the war to justify past sacrifices. For Ukraine, the vortex takes a different but equally punishing form. Every victory, whether shooting down a Su-35, blowing up a weapons depot, or repelling a Russian unit, is a statement Kyiv uses to stand its ground before Western lawmakers. It is proof that says, "We're fighting, so keep helping us." And once Ukraine proves its effectiveness, the West sends more aid. And with that aid comes added pressure to prove again that they're worthy of continued support. Gradually, Ukraine too becomes trapped in a cycle of dependence. Without aid, they cannot fight. But to secure aid, they must keep fighting. And to keep fighting, they sink deeper into reliance on external supplies of weapons, ammunition, intelligence, and finances. In this vortex, whether Kyiv wants it or not, the war must go on, at least until the West shifts its strategic priorities or Russia becomes too weakened to push back. And the West, as we've already seen, is also being pulled into this spiral. Having invested money, weapons, and political capital into Ukraine, they can't afford to let Kyiv fail. A Ukrainian defeat wouldn't just be a Russian victory. It would unravel decades of European security strategy. That's why the West, too, is trapped in a cycle. The more they aid, the more they must continue aiding. The deeper their involvement, the harder it becomes to withdraw. A Ukrainian success justifies more funding. A Ukrainian setback justifies more weapons. Either way, the war endures. This is the nature of a self-reinforcing spiral. No one wants to stop, and no one can. Russia must keep fighting to preserve its power and internal control. Ukraine must keep fighting to survive and keep the aid flowing. The West must keep supporting to defend its security order and geopolitical interests. These three forces intersect to form a closed loop, where every event, whether a down Su-35 or a lost frontline position, only makes the spiral spin faster. And like any vortex, once it reaches a certain speed, it no longer pulls in just political calculations. It drags in lives, resources, and the future of millions. The war is no longer just a confrontation between two nations. It's become a system, an architecture of interests, a tightly woven web of military, economic, political, and media pressures. When a Su-35 is shot down, it doesn't just fall to the ground. It falls into the center of that vortex, forcing every party to accelerate, to move forward, despite no one being certain where the road ahead actually leads. And in that bleak picture, only one question echoes. Will this spiral end in exhaustion, in collapse, or in some unexpected turning point? It's a question that not even the nations fighting this war know how to answer. As we close this story, it becomes clear that the downing of the Su-35 was not just a battlefield victory, not just a jet falling to the ground, not just a moment of impact echoing through the skies over Eastern Europe. It was a mirror. And in that mirror, we see more clearly the true nature of the Russia-Ukraine war. A conflict powered not only by bullets and bombs, but by budgets, supply chains, propaganda, great power strategy, and the interests of industries thriving off war. In the fiery blaze of the Su-35, we see a Russia paying dearly for every misstep over Ukrainian airspace, not only in money, but in time, manufacturing capacity, and in the military prestige it spent decades building. We also see a Ukraine fighting relentlessly, brave, but bound within a cycle of dependence on Western aid. A country both the victim and the keystone in a geopolitical architecture larger than itself. And we see the West, not directly on the battlefield, yet so deeply involved that every Ukrainian success or failure triggers billion-dollar shifts and decisions that reshape the security strategy of an entire continent. A fighter jet is shot down, but behind it lies an entire web of intertwined interests. A single explosion lights up the sky, but its echoes ripple all the way to factories in Siberia, conference rooms in Brussels, parliaments in Washington, and financial markets thousands of miles from the front lines. At its core, war has never been only about soldiers. It's the story of nations, of power structures, of mechanisms of interest that are not easily undone. Perhaps the most painful truth is this: while Russia, Ukraine, and the West revolve around each other in a strategic vortex, those who suffer the most are the ordinary people, those without a voice in the decisions, yet who bear the consequences most acutely. A Su-35 crashing to Earth might be a victory for one side or a loss for the other, but for the families who lose sons, who lose fathers, who lose peace, no victory will ever feel like enough. When we look back at that moment, the Su-35 turning into a fireball, we don't just see a battle, we see a deeper truth. That modern wars are fueled not just by weapons, but by calculations of power, profit, and perception. And as long as those forces remain, the spiral of war will keep turning. That, dear viewers, is why every perspective, every analysis, every conversation matters. We may not be able to change the battlefield, but we can seek to understand it more deeply, so we're not swept away by one-sided narratives. If you have your own thoughts or perspective on this event, please share them in the comments below. We welcome the conversation. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next deep dive into global geopolitics. Thank you, sincerely, for watching.